core values to valued culture, here is your host, Will Scott, interviewing another CEO about leading culture in their company.
Okay, listeners, and welcome to another Culture Czars interview where we talk to CEOs that care about corporate culture. We call this series From Core Values to Valued Culture, and Todd is a czar of culture, not only in his own company, Chicago Traction Center, but also for his clients. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Will. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Todd and I have known each other, wow, a good time now. Todd, I know I've learned a lot from you, and I think the listeners are going to love what you're going to share with us today. Please start by just telling us a little bit about Chicago Traction Center.
Sure, and I can tell you a little bit about myself as an entrepreneur also. I started my first business in 1991 when I was 23 years old. And that business took off. We grew that to 85 employees in the first year and a half. And I was swimming lost as a young entrepreneur, not knowing which way was up. And in the last 27 years, I've had 8 startups or acquisitions, 8 businesses that I've been substantially a part of. And today, my entrepreneurial life consists of 3 primary things. And that is the Chicago Traction Center, where I'm a coach to leadership teams using EOS, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System. I'm also a co-founder of Traction Tools, which is software for EOS. And I am a partner at OSM, a SaaS business that provides content management software for fast food restaurant digital menu boards. And between the 3 things, so there's different cultures in all 3 organizations that I'm currently a part of, plus my 19 clients that I coach. So as we go through this, I'm going to bounce between those different conversations.
And Todd, I'm proud to say that I am a client of yours on both counts. I know you've helped me in my companies implement Traction. And of course, as you know, I'm also using your software Traction Tools at my companies. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Culture can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Todd, what do you think of when we talk about corporate culture?
I think of a screening tool and a simple set of characteristics as the foundational things. This comes from EOS, of course. How simple, clear I get about culture right now has a lot to do with how EOS preaches culture, and that I identify there's 30 characteristics that you could have as a person. All cultures have 3 or 4 of those characteristics that are non-negotiables, whether they're stated or not. All we do when we go ahead and identify a company's core values, or the most important characteristics of the folks that work there, are get everybody aligned around a simple 3 or 4. And I find that when everybody's aligned around a simple 3 or 4, culture happens. Maybe spontaneous isn't the word, but easier.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. Once everything's defined like that, things feel more aligned and things do get easier. That's a word I hear a lot from CEOs who were operating without it before, when everything felt hard, and some months or maybe might take a year after defining culture that things just get easier.
It's not supposed to be hard work to build a great culture. It doesn't need something that is somebody's full-time energy if you are actively hiring and firing based on some key characteristics. And it really doesn't matter what the characteristics are, just so that everybody there is aligned around those characteristics.
I quite agree. And I like the way that you mentioned 3 or 4. I think that's an optimal number too. Any more than that, and people find it hard to remember them. But what process have you used with your clients then to get to those 3 or 4 key characteristics?
One of the mistakes I see people make regularly is that they think identifying these characteristics or values as a creative activity, where they dream up what they wish it is, and that's the aspirational core values.
How do they work?
But even the folks that are in the room don't meet the aspirational core values most of the time. So it's a discovery is the real simple approach to figuring out what your characteristics or core values are that you're going to align your company around. And they're the things that have always been true about your firm. And the ones I trust the most is when they haven't been made too pretty, when they haven't been made polished enough to be on your website or in your marketing. I actually question the core values that are touted to the outside world, where I really love them as like an internal secret. Everybody that works there knows them in spades, but to the outside world, they are not promoted. It's our HR filter. Why would we tell everybody in the world about our hiring and firing filter?
Yeah.
But I want everybody internally to know, of course.
Yeah. I certainly agree. I like it when companies also make them somehow personal or unique, with some unique lingo or phrases or some some traditions that are built up has arrived at the words that they use for their culture, as opposed to, integrity and respect, which everybody seems to like to put on their wall. And it's really stakes.
And it really, those that you bring up along with honesty and smart and hardworking are some of the permission to play core values. And so in the way that I teach core values to my coaching clients is like, you're going to screen for smart and honest in different ways in the interview process. You do not need to make smart and honest part of your core values. Right? You're going to screen smart based, well, there's a half dozen different ways to screen people for intelligence. You could simply talk to them and figure it out.
Right.
And honest, you're going to check references and other ways to check whether they're honest. So not only are they're kind of givens in the workplace, there are other more effective ways to screen people out of your hiring and firing process if they're not those things.
Yes. You mentioned hiring and firing, and Traction encourages us to use a very simple sort of measuring technique, don't they? For at least for the firing part, for measuring. I'm thinking about the GWC, and then you put your core values, and you just give everybody a number. And I know with my clients, I've been able to see when there's some folks that are kind of in the red zone at the bottom. When you get those folks out, how that is one of the most quickest ways to transition your culture in a company. Have you worked a lot with your clients on that simple measuring technique?
Yeah, and so for your listeners, GWC stands for Get It, Want It, and Capacity, and it's the way that we figure out if somebody's in the right seat. On the core values, we simply give people a yes, they exhibit that core value most of the time, or no, they don't most of the time, or sometimes yes, sometimes no, a plus or a minus or a plus minus.
Yeah.
That's all in a tool called the People Analyzer, which I find to be a brilliant tool because of its simplicity. The difficult thing is when you've got the wrong person, they don't meet your core values, but they're in the right seat. They are literally and quantifiably succeeding at their job, but yet they're taking a little dump on your culture every day when they come to work.
Yeah, and CEOs hate tackling that individual, don't they? Because they're delivering, but at the same time, they're negatively affecting the rest of the team.
You're your top salesperson because they're not a good culture fit. And, show me a CEO doing that. I'll show you a CEO with a business bright future.
Yeah. So how do those conversations go when you're speaking to your clients about, wow, this guy just doesn't fit your culture?
By the time that my clients have decided to use a professional coach around this, like myself or you, they're really ready to start making the bold moves. I do find
they've lived with frustration long enough, and they just want to get it, fix it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the reasons they're finally ready to take this seriously and get a coach for EOS is that they're ready to make the moves. It's they're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I agree, and I've seen now.
If I can, as I look at my clients and how quickly they make their businesses better and start growing faster and getting everything they want from their business, how quickly and decisively they make their people moves is one of the leading indicators for how well they're going to do and how fast they're going to get their business on track or to doing better than it's already doing.
Yeah.
My teams that procrastinate, the the difficult or obvious people decisions are the ones that move slower towards their goals.
I quite agree, and I've seen the same thing, and it's amazing how people feel, and it is a feeling walking into the office or the space 12 months after they've started, where this feels better, you know.
Yeah,
I'm just so glad they did it. Yeah,
you were saying something while I was talking over the top of you there. What were you saying?
Well, I'm just saying that they just feel so glad that they did it, finally make those tough decisions around the people, and now months later, the whole team and the whole environment, the culture just feels so much better to them. They're glad they finally did it. Yeah,
you should like coming to work at your own business, right? And I know a lot of entrepreneurs and people on leadership teams that don't like coming to the office because of the culture that they've created.
Yeah.
And what a shame.
Well, and I would probably challenge, they haven't actually created that culture. It's just developed by default because they didn't really create a culture.
You're right.
Yeah. And that's but I think CEOs are kind of often slow. They're so busy managing, clients and growth and stuff like that. They don't actually manage the most important thing in their business, which is the people. And the greatest thing they can give those people is a great culture, right? And then the other things tend to fall in line, has been my experience. So,
well, everything else is easier if the culture is working and there's trust built.
Yeah. And then what are some of your clients doing once they've established their core values to keep those, well, first of all, to bring those core values alive and then to really make them thrive so they're not just words on the wall?
Yeah, I think all of the things that you would see, Will, as being ordinary, given how well you've done this in the past. But the typical thing, so 4 times a year, a one-on-one coaching from between every boss and employee that we call the quarterly conversation.
Yeah.
It is not a review or a time for a raise. It's simply a conversation about how well they're doing. And one of the 3 components is how well they're fit in the culture and what their biggest room for improvement is.
Yeah.
There's 4 times a year an all company meeting where we go through the core values in detail and tell some stories about them and establish folklore. It is the leadership team's job to come up with these stories, this folklore that's memorable, and it becomes woven into the culture. And at some stage, everybody throughout the company can tell some of those folklore-like stories about the core values. That goes a long way.
Yeah.
I also really like core value shoutouts, where you're in groups of people, your employees, and one person to another is giving a shout out and referencing the core value. Oh, core value number 2, we make lemonade. I want to give a shout out to Sally.
Yeah.
She really came across a difficult situation with one of our clients and just turned it around, and they're delighted.
Turned lemons into lemonade.
Yeah.
And there's a shout out. I agree. Yeah. Some companies do monetary awards. Some companies just do the shout out, and that can be enough.
I have one of my clients doing shout outs on a weekly basis. They have an all hands stand up for 15 minutes on a Monday morning, and part of that is core value shout outs. But at a minimum, there's shout out and recognition around these core values on a quarterly basis in front of all the folks.
Yeah. And do you have any sort of, speaking of stories, are there any stories that you can think of from your clients where that a story is a folklore, and it just helps, again, bring alive the core value? I think I had to find them so particularly for new employees. When you bring somebody on and you tell them some of those stories, that's the thing they're going to remember the most about the culture and how to sort of fit in. Yeah,
I don't have specific stories. When I do use the word folklore, though, it really resonates with my clients that, that's what we're doing. We are creating those types of stories that can be handed down generation after generation. And maybe within the corporate structure, it's handed down layer after layer after layer rather than decade after decade after decade. But that's the stuff that I really appreciate about that, is the making of the stories. I would love to segue into trust a little bit as we talk about it. I do find these 2 topics to be really intertwined, that the culture and the trust, just one without the other is not nearly as powerful. And maybe you can't even have a good culture without trust. So regardless of what you've identified for your core values, if there's not trust, it's all for naught.
Yes. And you might wonder which comes first, right? But of course, one of the things for sure we want to do in creating a deliberate culture as opposed to a default culture is one where there's trust, because we know trust in a team sense is just so important to performance, and really allowing each individual to perform at their best and to feel comfortable in the environment.
Yeah, man, I do work with some leadership teams that don't have full trust developed. They're on the journey to doing it, and everything that they're working to accomplish is more difficult than the teams with full trust.
Yeah. So
I was just going to say over and over, I see evidence that you do not need to be the smartest person in your industry to win. It's not. This is not a race based on IQ. IQ does not equal horsepower in the work environment or in the team trust area. It's a lot of these softer skills are the companies that end up coming out on top.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, so let's say you have a boardroom where there is low trust and they're kind of trying to develop that. Do you do, I know, I forget what it's called, Todd, but there's an exercise that EOS recommends where we kind of go back to our shares experiences about our childhood and where we came from. What sort of things have you seen that help people build trust and by being vulnerable and open with each other?
Is it okay if I walk you around a little bit?
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome.
Won't get too dizzy. Here, I'll walk out to my bookshelf and I'll get the workbook that you're referencing from a book that everybody on listening to this has probably read. But the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team
yeah.
by Patrick Lencioni.
Yes.
There is a workbook. This is the workbook piece of it. And this is brilliant. This is 100 pages of the exercises you can do with your team around building team trust or psychic safety. And with EOS, we borrow a number of these, we call them trust builders. They are conversations that you have with your leadership team at first to build trust, and then ultimately everybody in the organization is having these conversations.
Yeah.
At the foundation of a lot of that is vulnerability, that people trust others who are willing to be vulnerable. So if you're prancing around your office with your ego and your self-importance and your bulletproofness and never showing the soft underbelly, it's really difficult for others to trust.
Yes. No, thank you for that. I quite agree. Vulnerability is huge. And just to mention that book again, it's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And he has both, I guess, the textbook, or sometimes he writes them as fables, but he's also got the workbook for that, right? The field guide, effectively.
It's called the field guide. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. So, where do you think your CEOs place managing culture in the other priorities that they're tackling? They have to think about, as I said before, growth and prices and clients and those things. But is culture one of those things they are considering a priority?
Yes. All of the CEOs that I coach are definitely making culture a priority. I mean, a top 3 priority, I would say, is quite universal.
Yeah.
Some folks would say it's number 1 and it comes before everything else. But all of the leadership teams that seek out a business coach, like you and I, are in a place where they're ready to recognize this is a really important factor.
Yeah. And I don't think you ever worked for anybody, did you, Todd? You basically have always been your own boss.
Yeah, that's true, since college.
But some employees some entrepreneurs I know, were so frustrated with the culture that they were working in before they became an entrepreneur. That was one of the reasons that spurred them to go and do something for themselves.
Yeah,
so
I know
the
those
work
stories
environment
too.
that they wanted. Yeah.
Yeah. Want to develop a workplace that they want to come to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what about within your own companies then, Todd? I know you've had several of them. What are some of the things that you've done there for culture, or that you would consider good advice for our listeners?
Well, I would say that part of the mistake that I made and my first 3 ventures anyway, maybe first 4 out of 8, is not prioritizing culture very high, allowing culture to happen spontaneously, but also putting up with people for longer than I should have that were clearly not a cultural fit.
Yeah.
I've been one of those entrepreneurs that if the salesperson was hitting their numbers, I would keep them regardless of how they didn't fit the culture.
Yeah.
And I was weak, I want to confess, about that, not having the kahuna to make the difficult decisions. I mean, it's easy when people aren't producing and they don't fit your culture. They're not the right person for your culture, and they also are not succeeding in the role. That's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
But when they're succeeding and they're not a good culture fit, that's separates the winners from the losers. I would assert in business.
And you mentioned the difficult decision, but there's also often a difficult conversation that has to be had, right? The firing or the review, where you want to, counsel an associate on how they're benchmarked against culture and so on. But I find the core values actually make those difficult conversations easier because you've got like a compass to refer to. And so I think, again, once you've got those words on the wall, you can step into the room and have that conversation, and it becomes less about you and me and sort of personal and judgmental. It's like just reference the values and a conversation around how well is that person fitting. And often, sometimes I've seen folks even kind of nodding and self-selecting. Yeah, maybe this isn't the place for me, and it just makes the job a lot easier. So to me, just another reason to have core values. And
so I have to concur. A quarterly conversation at a minimum is one-on-one between all bosses and employees, where culture is a primary piece of the conversation. And I look at our core values when I'm sitting side by side with one of my direct reports, and I ask them to rate themselves. Which one of our core values do you have the most room for improvement on? And I also pick the core value that I feel they have the most room for improvement. And then we share our answers. And this is all a boss to employee relationship filled with love and trust and respect. And then we get to have a quality conversation about what they could do better to make that one better, and what I could do as their boss to help or support them in rising up around that core value. Most organizations don't have a loving, real direct touch about this. And if you're about to fire somebody because they don't fit your culture, but you've never offered them coaching about how to get there, shame on you.
Absolutely. It's interesting you use the word loving there, but it's a gift when you will actually have that tough conversation with that person and give them feedback that they can really use to learn from. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, and if business isn't about love, I'm just not interested. And when it's at its best, it's working with people that I love, doing work that I love.
Yeah,
it is a win-win for everybody. And I want to create a culture where people love the people they're working with and they love coming to work there.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to forget the human side of things. And we are humans, we have feelings. And if we address that in a positive way, it's just going to be better for the individual, better for the team, and of course, better for the company.
Yeah.
And what about the investment? One of the things I like to say, Todd, is what else can you work on in your company where it takes actually a very low capital investment, has a very high return, and is fun, right?
Right. It does have all three of those characteristics.
Yeah. And, if you need to increase capacity and you're a manufacturing company, you've got to think about a big investment in a piece of equipment or something. But this is just some time, maybe some printing costs, and yet the return can be just massive, and it's fun. And so, why not make that little investment?
It's fun for certain leaders. I don't think this conversation is fun or comfortable for all leaders.
Oh, I appreciate that challenge, Todd. Yes.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we help those guys?
Let's not assume that the folks that own the business or are at the top and running the business are the best influences on culture.
Yeah.
There are people in the organization that can be your cultural leaders, and they may not be on the leadership team.
Yeah.
And let's recognize them. Who cares where they're at in the organization?
I quite agree. Yeah, thanks for that little segue there, because of course the reason that my company is called Czars is about finding the Czars in the organization who are going to help you take your culture forward. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be. You're right. It just doesn't have to be the CEO or a leader. Great if it is, and you can have multiple of them. But yeah, you can have a champion for the culture that is simply scoring, in EOS terms, I guess, a plus on all the core values, and is doing the shout-outs and is using the words in everyday language around the meetings and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, quite literally with Traction Tools, a company that I was co-founder of three and a half years ago now. We're up to about 36 employees. Our culture stems from our client success department. Client success is a combination of sales and customer service. And the leader that we have there, who is one of our first leaders in the organization, is named Isaiah. And for years, when we're together, we're talking about, we want the culture that's in the client success department to be the culture across all departments.
Yeah.
That's our company culture, and it's I think counterintuitive to some folks that it would start at some place other than one of the founders, but that's absolutely how it started at Traction Tools.
Yeah. No, I know Isaiah. He's awesome, and Regis is a pretty enthusiastic chap too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that whole department has a really nice cultural fit.
Yeah.
So, and we're just trying, there's a certain glow in that department, which, what a great department to have a real sweet cultural glow to them, the department that's touching all of our clients every day. So of all the departments I could choose, I'd rather have it be there than in finance or something. And,
but I'm sure it permeates the rest of the company too.
Because we promote it that way, because we're crystal clear when we're together as a leadership team all the time. Just to be clear, that's the culture we want across all departments. We're not, that's not just a thing for client success, and we're not going to copy the culture going on in another department. We're copying that culture. That's the one we want.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. So thank you so much for your time today, Todd. Any final thoughts for us?
This is an active activity, and it is a people filter for figuring out who to hire and who to fire. It is not a marketing activity. If you're using them in your marketing, I would question whether or not they're your authentic core values, or if you've prettied them up for your website.
Yeah.
This is an HR tool, and on top of screening them during the hiring process, which is all about behavioral-based interview questions with a scoring system that you can delegate down, there has to be a function within the business that fires fast when you figure out that somebody's not a core values fit. It is, because no organization, even with the best interview process and behavioral-based questions and scoring systems for those questions, there are no organizations that hire perfectly. So when you have somebody that comes on board and in the first 3 weeks you find that they're not a cultural fit and they get let go 3 weeks into the job, kudos to everybody around that. That's a high five situation. That is a leadership win. Knowing that there's no way for hiring to be perfect.
And I quite agree, and we haven't talked much about the interview side of things, but you're right. Behavioral interviews that try and screen for folks that are a fit with culture. And one of the great ways I like to do that is you ask, again, it's the stories. What are the stories in the company? That becomes your question, because that's a what if scenario. What if you ask your candidate, what if you find yourself in this situation? You've got your perfect answer because it actually happened, and then you can sort of benchmark a little bit against that with your candidate. And then again, if they're not fitting, my experience has been that if someone's talking about an employee too much, or talking about, they're usually the problem employee, and then hey, maybe we should rank them against our core values and see if they're a fit. Because if we're spending too much internal energy talking about what this individuals creating for us, it's probably a sign that they're not a fit or not performing. Yeah.
Having a quantifiable way that a company assesses the core values fit with their folks in EOS with the people analyzer.
Yeah.
But having a quantifiable way where a person's core fit with your culture becomes more data driven, I find gets my clients to make those decisions faster.
Yeah, I love it. If they're talking and they're not sure, you can step up to the whiteboard, do that quick assessment, and very quickly shows, and you put your best employee up there, maybe an average, and then the one that you're talking about, and suddenly the clarity comes there because it's kind of numerical and somewhat less judgmental. Yeah.
Yeah. It certainly has me be in action more or quicker.
Yeah.
When it's quantifiable. Yeah. I also recently ordered some core values cards where one of my clients is having some really interesting success as a firm where they don't publish their core values. And these core value card decks come with 50 core values listed. And what they did is they went through and picked out the 5 or 6 that most relate to their core values. And then they stack the deck with like another 10 or 15 that are not their core values. And then when they have interviewees come in on top of the behavioral interview questions with a scoring system, they're saying, hey, of those 20 cards in this deck, would you pick out the 5 that best describe you?
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Cool. And then come back over here and sit down in our interview and tell me a story about you and this core value. And they're just paying attention because the deck's quite stacked. You know, there's 6 of their cards in there and there's another 14. They just want to see, hey, how many of our 6 do they choose before they know?
Yeah.
And if you have core values on your website or you're really promoting them as part of your marketing, you're tipping your hand.
Yes. Yes, it's hard to do. I certainly say at least take them down when you're doing the interview. But then later on in the interview, you quite sort of bring them out and say, well, so here are our values, and let's talk about, you know, how these resonate for you.
I would ask, and I know, Will, you've had some success in polishing up a set of core values and using them in marketing. Often I believe that they are not the most effective marketing to your prospective customers, that they care more about your product, service, and price at the beginning of your relationship than they do about your culture. And so although they're out there as a marketing tool, that they're not the most effective marketing tool. And I think they're an awesome HR and people filter, a screening tool for hiring and firing. They're awesome for that.
Yes, no, I agree. Core values in themselves are, I don't think they should be used for marketing, especially in a B2C. With B2B, I do actually think it can be very effective when a leader thinks not just of managing a company where you're just sort of thinking about the 4 walls and you kind of think about shareholders and that sort of thing, but thinking about leaders leading a culture which might extend beyond that. And actually having vendors that align with your culture and just show them the core values and say, hey, these are the kind of vendors that work well with us. And you can do the same for your clients if you're in a B2B kind of a space or a consulting space. So I think there are opportunities to extend it beyond your organization. But yeah, they are not about marketing. No.
Yeah, and so you bring up a good point. The core value screening is not just for employees, it's for customers and vendors also.
Right.
Especially customers in B2B.
Yes.
Vendors in either B2C or B2B. You want to screen vendors based on these.
Yeah.
And you, to take it a step further, when we talk about using them outside of your organization, if you understand your own personal core values, you've been screening friendships for your whole life based on your core values. If you bring them to the surface and are able to articulate them for yourself, you'll screen friendships better. We have a set of family core values that I talk to my kids about, and it's about, this is partially how you choose friends. And then my long-term game on this is I'm hoping that they choose significant others based on these core values because they are my core values and our family's core values. So I'm trying to stack the deck for my in-laws someday so that they're people that I like to hang out with.
Right. That's very cool. So there again, yes. So there again, you're really leading a culture rather than just leading a company, because we're about more than our company. And yeah, I agree. If you can hang with people that have the same values, that tends to be have you more aligned again on your life's path.
Yeah. I think that's part of what makes EO and YPO work so well, is that those are peer groups heavily aligned around a common set of core values.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then just going back to the sort of the vendor and customer thing, I find that works two ways, especially if you're able to tour a customer within your facility, and your culture is up on the wall in the form of your core values, and you do the core values speech. These are the kind of customers these are our values. I think that's a differentiator from perhaps your competitor down the street who's not doing that. And then when you have to have a difficult conversation with a vendor or a customer, and again, you can refer to the core values, it just makes that go so much easier. Yeah. So, okay, Todd, well, I think we'll finish on the thought about you extending core values to your friendships and to your families. Yeah, that's really cool. And I know Vern Harnish talks about that too, doesn't he? Rockefeller Habits and Scaling Up. He talks about having a set of family core values.
Yes. Yeah. It makes sense. I was not as inspired by the family core values until I was clear that they're for screening people that we surround our family with. This is the active purpose for them. They are not wall art. They are a filter for the people we choose to have close to our family.
Right. Yeah. No, if you've got teenage children and there's a friend who you're not too sure about, benchmark them against your core values if you have them, and I'm sure it's going to tell you very quickly, yep, that's not who we want you hanging out with.
Right. And my kids are all in elementary school right now, and it's completely my intention to teach them to do this ongoingly themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, thanks, Todd, as always. And congratulations with your success, 8 companies startup, your current companies, Traction Tools, software for companies using Traction. The Chicago Traction Center, where you are an implementer of EOS, and I know you're much loved in this community of Chicago of entrepreneurs. Thanks a lot for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will.
Cheers, Todd.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at culturezars.com, and we'll see you next time.